So our panel is about playing with ambient lighting. My name is Richard Bowie. I'm basically a wedding photographer with BowiePhotos.com, and also I work with CosplayPhotographers.com. To my far is Rachael. She's a hobby cosplay photographer, and she's also looking to expand into other areas of photography. She also happens to be CosplayPhotographers.com featured photographer of December. Right here, immediately to my right, is Tim. He's COO of Cosplay Photographers, as well as 5rings.net.
You guys didn't check in.
Oh.
But that's fine. When we shoot this, it's 10 minutes.
Gotcha. And then, gotcha. He's also a fashion, lifestyle, and engagement photographer, and does motorsports photography as well. So our goal for today is really to provide you guys with some really basic tips and tricks that you guys can immediately apply to your photography. So hopefully we'll be able to give you guys like at least a few things that you can take immediately after this panel, apply them immediately to your photography for the rest of today. And if there's one concept that we can stress for today that you should take away, and that's why we're including it at the very beginning, is this one concept. Lighting is all about apparent light source size in relation to the subject, regardless if you use flash or ambient lighting. So this is kind of like the basic foundation of everything that's related to lighting. And we'll go into a little bit more discussions about that. So we're going to talk a little bit about equipment. We're just going to blow through it because this really isn't about equipment, but just to give you guys a general idea of what we use and how we use it to our advantage and everything. So I pretty much focus on using full frame cameras with low megapixels with high ISO capabilities, because often I'm shooting, I go back and forth between flash and ambient, but I like to shoot for mood and feel, so I shoot a lot of ambient. And also Lightroom has an amazing noise filter too, so I'm not afraid to shoot in high ISO. And my favorite lens is the 51.2. Rachel?
Okay, well, I started photography with the Canon XTI. And I'm still using it today. It's been about 4 years, maybe 5 years. And I keep using it because I'm used to it. I know where all the buttons are and how it functions, and so it's really comfortable. And for lenses, I use a 50mm 1.8. It's really affordable on Amazon. Like, you can get it at a pretty good price, and it does a really good job in low lighting situations because of the aperture. You're able to cheat a little more versus using the kit lens. Yeah.
Okay. I started with the Rebel T1i a few years ago, and then about a year later, I decided I needed a little more power, so I went to 7D. And then I decided I wanted to go to a full frame, but I didn't want to spend that much, so I got the 5D Classic, which is actually like 5 years old, but it's still a great camera. And then just recently I moved to the 5D Mark III, and it's basically everything the 5D was, but better. And my favorite lens combo is the 135 f2 with it.
So you guys have noticed that we talk a lot about prime lenses. That just seems to be our preferential choice, mainly because of the wide apertures, so it makes our lives much, much easier. So we're going to talk a little bit about modifiers.
Right. So when we're talking about ambient light, we don't mean just whatever's available. You can bounce it around and use modifiers with it.
So this is a disc light reflector, and I frequently use it when I'm shooting. As you can see, it's the disc, and then if you open it, the cover is reversible. So there's a silver side, and then there's a gold side and a black side, and you can use the different colors to get a different effect when you're reflecting sunlight onto your cosplayer.
You can also use the clear translucent side right here as a way to reduce some of the light. So sometimes the sun is very harsh, so by just letting the light go through, you can get nice soft diffused light as well. And also, I don't know if many people have wondered what the black side is for. That's what is referred to as kind of a scrim. It helps like against reflections or areas that you don't want light. So there is a use for that black side. You want to give an example of when you use it or anything?
Well, for each of the different ones, for the white one, that's your normal situation. Is you're going to use your white side. If you're trying to balance for like afternoon sun, then you would probably use the gold side. Silver, if you're looking for something, you want to cool the light a little bit, and then of course black, you want to just kill the light maybe on like one side of your subject.
So what I find sometimes is that in shade, using the gold side will help warm up the skin tone. So you might not necessarily want to use silver in shades because then that's going to make people look a little bit too blue. So there's also non-typical light reflectors too that most people may not think about or use, but they don't think too much about it. And one of the examples would be like buildings, grounds floors, windows, and awnings. So buildings, for example, like being under, like being next to like big building walls, if you notice sometimes, it actually does reflect light back onto you. So those make like great, like, because I always forget to pack my reflector. And so oftentimes I'm always looking for like a nice reflective building to put my subject next to get, and plus because it's big source, big light source, as we kept talking about, it's gonna make nice soft light.
Richard, can I say
Oh,
something?
sure.
Hello there. Just to add on that, for this location specifically, when you're out here where the fountains used to be, where the planters are now, the building we're in right now, the Marriott, during the daytime will actually do exactly what he's saying. The windows on this building reflect light down and even out the lighting of that region down there. So that's something you can actually apply today right here at this con.
Yeah, and also grounds and floors, people don't think of it, but it does actually serve as a reflective surface. Like if you look outside on the concrete, sometimes you'll see that it's kind of sparkling. And that shows that, like on a really hot, bright day, sometimes you're seeing like a lot of nice, like low light, like uplift, and that's very helpful to get some fill in on the bottom as well. We'll talk a bit about windows.
Right. So when you think of the window as your light source, it changes the size of the light. So if you would normally shoot in direct sun, your light becomes very harsh. But if you move them behind a window, essentially the window becomes your light source instead of the sun, and so it's much softer.
And that's why people always talk about like, oh, window light is like one of the most beautiful light, is because it becomes this big, huge light source. And there's also awnings. So like, sometimes when you're walking under like certain buildings, you know how they have like those overhangs and everything, those make perfect scrim. So like if you're looking around, it's really sunny everywhere. Oftentimes we'll use those areas. We wouldn't put people directly like deep into the shade, but just at a point where we call the sweet spot, where it's about a foot in from where the sun is. So if you see where the sun is, you take a step in, you'll notice that there's very nice soft light.
We'll have examples of these later on in the slides.
Talk about your last one.
Oh, and also nature can be used as well for scrims and diffusers. So trees, like oftentimes I'm sure you guys have shot near trees and everything. The leaves and everything make great like diffusion material because as light hits those leaves and they're coming through all those layers of leaves, light gets softer and softer. That's why like in those fours, you get that, like sometimes it gets a little too dark, but there's also always that sweet spot where there's just enough light coming through where everybody looks evenly lit and everything. So there's also like a little controversial thing, you know, like regarding, well, I wouldn't say so much controversial, but some people make it, well, I don't know how many people would consider this like ambient light, but for me, I kind of consider it a little bit, I consider it cheating in a way because you're kind of bringing your own light. I don't know if you guys have actually seen any of the, like one of these things. They're just basically, you know, a great way to add light quickly and easily. For me, I think anything that isn't really flash, I kind of consider it ambient because like this is ambient light, and so, you know, but I think my fellow panelists disagree, but I leave it up to you guys to, like flashlight too, like that's another common thing that we'll use to light people is like flashlights. It sounds kind of odd and awkward, but light is light at the end of the day. Anything that you can get to add a little bit is going to make a big difference.
Okay, so this is an example of the reflector being used. This is at AX. So as you can see, there's cosplayers in the center, and they're getting light from the cosplayers holding the reflector at the bottom right hand of the screen. You can see that they have, it looks like a flash effect on them, but it's actually coming from the light reflector itself. So this is one of the shots using that light reflector. they're against the window, so of course the sun would be what's lighting them from behind, but the reflector is doing a good job filling in the shadows, and you can clearly see the details in their faces and their costumes. If you can see the hand for the cosplayer on the right, her hand, how it's darker, that's what color their faces would have been without using the light reflector, and so it would have been a lot harder to fix this shot in post if the reflector hadn't been used. Okay, so this was taken this past spring at a cherry blossom festival. In the top left-hand corner is the shot setup. I'm shooting, and Erskine, he's another photographer, he's holding the light reflector for me. On the bottom right is the result. The cherry blossoms are actually really white colored, so if I hadn't been using the reflector and I'd been exposing for the cosplayer, it would have pretty much blown out the cherry blossoms in the back because of the difference between the value between the cherry blossoms and the cosplayer.
So why shoot ambient? So there are pros and cons, obviously. Some of the pros, it's easier, faster, simpler. You don't have to have nearly as much gear to do it. And it's also cheaper too, because you don't have to also invest in so much gear. And it also has this very natural look. So then there's also cons of why to shoot ambient as well.
So generally, for the most part, I prefer shooting strobes, but because it gives me more control. So with ambient light, you have less control of your lighting. You have to deal with whatever's available to you. I mean, with the help of a reflector, but you're still pretty much at the mercy of whatever's out there. With strobes, you can shoot low ISO all the time because you're controlling your light and the power of your light. But with ambient light, you know, if you're using a lamp, a desk lamp as your light source, it's not actually that bright. Even windows, most windows are tinted now, so you know, they're still not that bright. You're still going to have to turn your ISO settings up. So it also limits the time that you can shoot, because you know, if your camera can't do those high ISO settings, then you know, you're not going to be able to shoot at night, basically.
So common settings and modes that are used for shooting ambient. We'll let Tim talk first on this one.
I'm kind of lazy, so I just shoot in aperture priority most of the time. And then I use exposure compensation to dial it up or down depending on what I'm going for.
Okay, yeah, so I shoot in manual, and it's partially because I've been using my camera for so long. I'm really used to just adjusting on the fly. So in order to shoot on manual, especially in ambient light where the sun, if it goes behind a cloud, you're going to have to adjust for that immediately. You have to keep those sorts of things in mind. But it's good practice to shoot in manual also if you're not used to it and you're comfortable practicing on a cosplayer.
And I shoot in manual as well for the same reasons that Rachel does. Okay.
So golden hour is typically 1 hour after sunrise and 1 hour before sunset, and this is considered by photographers to be like the ideal lighting situation. Because of the location of the sun, we can shoot in like what would be direct sunlight, but you're still able to get good highlights and shadows in your shots.
Okay, I'm gonna apologize ahead of time because most of my examples aren't cosplay, because I shoot strobes most of the time. So if I'm being lazy, then I'll shoot ambient light. But the first shot here is just shot it's at golden hour, and I actually adjusted it a little bit in post that it's cooler than what you would normally see, because golden hour is very golden, so sometimes it'll be a little bit too orange, so you know, you can correct that if you want. But you can see there's nice even lighting, you know, across the whole body, and then the shadows aren't too harsh either.
Okay, so this shot was taken a few years ago actually. This is in golden hour direct, well, would have been direct sunlight. He's not under any sort of awning, so this As you can see, the shadow across his body is softer. This is from a tree, but because of the golden hour sunlight, it really softens the edges, and you're able to put the cosplayer in this sort of situation that you normally wouldn't be able to, like at noon. So it's nice to do things like this and experiment with your shots when you're able to.
So when to shoot, lighting situations according to a different time of the day, and posing according to the sun.
Okay, so most people actually say don't shoot directly into the sun, but for the most part, I prefer shooting into the sun. In this shot, I used the model to actually block out the sun so that it didn't get a direct flare. Something to keep in mind when you're shooting into the sun, or even in natural light, is there's a 3-stop difference between sunlight and shade. So when you're doing exposure compensation, or even if you're doing it manually, you have to remember that if you're exposing for your subject and there's a lot of sunlight in your shot, you'll have to adjust it roughly 2 to 3 stops in either direction. So this is what I mean by that, because on the left, I let my camera expose. And it probably done about 1/2000 at f2. And you'll see it exposes the highlights very well. So they're not like too blown out. You'll see a little bit on the edges that are blown out, but everything else is pretty even. But my subject is completely lost in the dark. So I did this one manually, but I dialed it back 3 stops. So the one on the right is at 1/250, also at f2. And you'll see the subject is very well lit. And I didn't really care about my background here, so I just let it blow out. And you'll see how using the sun as the backlight, there's a nice rim light, like edge light around the shoe, up the leg, along that whole left side.
Yeah. Okay. So similar to Tim's shot, this is also with the sun backlighting the subject. I'm exposing for the cosplayer, and so. But there isn't much in the back, so I don't really have to worry about the back being blown out because it's basically foliage. So he also has a rim light going around his leg and up his torso area, which makes him stand out from the darker foliage in the back. And one thing to notice here is that I used the tree to block the sun from hitting his face. There's a lens flare going from the top left to the bottom right. If the tree hadn't been there, I probably would have blown out his facial features, but it's blocking the sun from doing so. And so it's important to watch out for that sort of thing. Usually you can see it in your lens when you're shooting, but just be careful of lens flares because they could ruin a shot. This is taken at Golden Gate Park. This is an example of how lighting can change within a very few seconds. So the 2 on the left were taken really quickly, and then the sun started coming out in the bottom one, so I backed off, and then you can see the framing is a lot better in the right hand side, and that's basically just due to the sun coming out and causing the shadow, which made a nice compositional element. So using lighting in your composition is also a good thing to look for when you're shooting.
So this shot was actually shot here at Fanime. This is an example of using the wall as a reflector. As you notice right there on the right-hand side, there's a lot of light. That basically is providing the light on her face, and I'm just letting the sun come through, kind of hit her on the shoulders and kind of the arms a bit there, to kind of give some dimension. And so that was just a very basic shot there. Here's an example of how it was just kind of done quickly. So I used some of the ground to help balance up some of the light as well.
Okay, and then, so the other direction is, of course, is having your cosplayer look into the sun and using the sun as your main light. A good trick for that is to have your cosplayer close their eyes before the shot, and then give them a count of 3, and then they can open their eyes so that they're not blinded by the sun. You can see this is kind of afternoon sun, so it's fairly even lighting all over. And then of course, this is using the sun as the backlight. I actually had to bring the light on her face up in post about a stop. And at this size you can't see it, but if you zoom in too much, then there's a bit of noise there. And yeah. And then this shot is kind of a mix of both, and it's not one of my favorite shots lighting-wise because the shadow, or rather the light highlight on her nose, kind of stands out to me, and I kept her face in the dark side. I probably could have turned her a little bit more in either direction to even it out, so I wouldn't have, so it either all be in shadow or more of that side would be in sun.
So this was shot at ALA, another example of like how I typically shoot as well, where we talk about like that overhang and awning kind of thing. So basically what it is that there's like this big overhang thing. So I set her maybe about a foot and a half in, let the sun like bounce through, and then just kind of give like nice soft light onto her face and everything. So also another time to shoot, one of my favorite times actually, is nighttime and indoors.
Okay, so this was shot at AX. This was a shoot that ran overtime. I usually try to avoid night shoots, but I had to sort of make up for it in this one. And so in this case, I had to move them directly underneath the street light because that was basically the only source of light that I had. And lighting them from the back was a better solution than putting them too close to the pole where it would be going directly on top of their faces, and their facial features would have kind of been unflattering. And this was shot at ISO 1600, so basically the highest my camera could go. And it did have noise, but you can remove it in post pretty well with Lightroom or Photoshop. And this was taken inside of a hotel. Also, I'm using only the hotel lights. There's a light reflector off to the left side of the cosplayer on the left, and it's bouncing the light back onto the side of her face, so you can see like her ear part of her face. Without the light reflector, her ear and the left side of her hat would have been totally lost in the shadow and kind of blend into the background, and that would have been kind of distracting. So whenever possible, using your light reflector in these sorts of situations are also helpful. Even if it's not in sunlight, you can bounce off of things sort of like lamps or like wall lighting, and it still gets sort of a solution to your problems.
So this one was shot here at Fanime too, I believe, or yeah. So basically all I did was I just took her, put her under a street lamp, had her look up, just to kind of create a nice, like, kind of moody shot. Very simple, very easy, didn't take too long to set up, and just knocked it out very quickly. This one was actually shot a couple days ago here at Fanime. So this was actually cheating by using a little, one of these to kind of give it a little bit of light. But if you also notice on the left-hand side right there, he's actually being lit a little bit by one of the lamps outside in front as well. So that kind of gives it a nice outline. I try to balance the light so it looks kind of natural and be hard to tell that there was any additional light that was introduced. This one was also shot a couple days ago as well. Same thing, I used this little light panel to get a little bit of fill in her face. Otherwise, like, you kind of see the shadow that's kind of lightly going across her face. That part would be all in shadow. A lot of the light is lit by the lamp. I let the lamp do all the heavy lifting and added a little bit, just a touch of light. And I could have easily used the reflector as well. So there's nothing that says that you have to use one of these light panels to do it. This one, very simple. It was actually very dark in this area. So what I did was I took this, I pointed it up against the wall. So you'll notice that the wall is very lit, and I just let a little bit of light fall onto her face, just enough to be able to bring her out a little bit.
This one was shot at AX a couple years ago, and my only light source here is a lamppost. But when we talk about reflective surfaces or non-traditional light modifiers, most of the lighting of face here is just coming off of the gray from the railing and the gray from the outfit. So you can see how it lights up her face on on the left side, and then it gives a nice gradient across the face itself. This one was shot in a parking garage and behind a fence. And so something you want to do when you're posing in according to your light source is if your light is directly overhead, you can have them look up a little bit to even out the shadows so you don't get that raccoon eye effect that you would normally get if you were shooting like high noon sun or something.
When to shoot. Weather affects shots as well.
So this one was shot on a very overcast day, and I think it actually started to rain like a few minutes after we stopped shooting. Something to keep in mind when you're shooting on very overcast days is the sky is still very bright, so if you include a lot of it in the image, it'll just blow out. In this case, it's blown out, but I added some vignetting, so it's just kind of grayish instead. This one was also actually in the rain, and if you had a full-size shot of this, you would see that there's raindrops coming across the pants and everywhere. And the background is just basically fog.
This was shot in San Francisco. It was a pretty foggy, rainy day. We're inside of a walkway that has the columns blocking from the rain, so we're kind of protected, but the fog still got in, and you can see the light looks really diffused when it goes toward the back of the photo, and so the weather feature does help. And also, this was warmed up heavily in post-processing. The colors of these photos were really cold because of due to the weather, and so. If you shoot in normal white balance, you can always change the colors later on to make it look like you weren't really shooting in the rain.
So this one was shot at ALA. It was about like 5, I would say, and overcast. So I just found like this kind of like alleyway, which worked out nicely because light would basically become like a light tunnel where light just bounced right off of each other, and I positioned them all accordingly, so that shadows wouldn't be cast on them, and everything is basically lit natural lighting right here. So where to shoot? Shade. So this is a popular place, but one big place that you have to be aware of is shadows.
Okay, so when we talk about using the edge of the shade, this is what we mean, right? If you look at the image on the right, I had to take a step out from where she was standing, and then you can see how that's how the sun would fall if she was if you were shooting in the sun. This was probably like 2 in the afternoon. So I had to take a step back into the shade, and you can see how it's very nicely evenly lit all over.
Okay, we'll see. Okay, in this shot is similar. This was in a parking garage, and she is close to the entrance of the garage, and so the light's hitting her, the light that's coming in, and the back is lit from the other side, and so it makes a nice gradient on the ground. Watching out for things like these that make also compositional elements in your photo it's fun to see what you can do with limited lighting resources. And this was shot at AX. In the top left-hand corner, this is where we originally met up, and it just wasn't working because the difference between the light and the shadow coming through the leaves was so great that it was blowing out the cosplayers' faces in certain areas. And so we moved to the bottom right-hand side location, which is also under a tree. But because the tree's leaves are a lot more see-through than the other trees, the difference between the light and the shadow was a lot less. And so I was still able to shoot under a tree, but because this was a better one, it worked out better. So ultimately, choose your trees wisely because it does make a big difference.
So this one was shot here at Fanime. If you guys remember the area that they've now torn up, basically. So I actually have Chloe like really deep in, because where we've been talking about like that sweet spot, just putting them about a foot in from where the sun is hitting, I actually took her deeper in. This is where Tim was talking earlier about 1 to 3 stop difference. So by bringing her really in, I had to like really jack up my ISO and go wide open. And what happens is that the background starts blowing out, which works out for this shot because I didn't want to like get too much people walking around in the background. So this is one like trick that I did so that I can get rid of the background without having to mess around too much in Photoshop. Another like similar example, except this one wasn't so extreme. This was shot through all those trees up there, so I just let the light kind of go through and diffuse it a lot. And on this one, I wanted more of the background in, so I didn't take her so far into the shade that I had to really, expose for the subject. This one is just right there at the sweet spot, so that's why she's a lot more lit compared to the other ones. She's just standing maybe about a foot in from where the sun is.
So the other thing you can do is do a silhouette with your lighting, right? If you're, when we say you can expose for your subject and let everything else blow out, this is basically letting everything blow out and not even exposing for your subject. There's a lot of characters who are recognizable by just a particular feature or especially a prop, and so it works very well in those cases because it just shows off those things.
So where to shoot as well, indoor lighting sources. This is another thing that I use quite a bit as well, like overhead lights, lamps, chandeliers, and windows, as we talked about.
So this is a bit of an extreme case of using a window, and I put it right up next to the window, and generally you don't want to do this because you're still getting direct sun, but I liked how the sun fell on her face in this case, so it's a little bit softer and a little bit more even than if I had been in direct sun. So you can still see, the highlights aren't blown, just the very edges are, but you can still see all the detail in the shadow areas.
One thing quickly note too, dirty windows will actually make the light softer because it's got to fight through more. So if you choose a clean window, it's going to be very bright versus if you choose a slightly dirty window where it's going to help soften the light. So that's kind of a quick tip and trick.
As using the dirty window for that.
Exactly.
This is from that same day, and my light source here is just your average hotel room desk lamp. So I had to turn up my ISO settings and open up my aperture a lot. So this is probably like 1/40th at ISO 1600. What you can do if you have a lot of grain is basically just go black and white, and black and white kind of, it makes the grain more film-like.
Okay, so this was shot indoors in a San Francisco public location. The windows are to the right of the cosplayers, and they're shooting across the room, hitting the wall behind them and reflecting down the wall and also down onto the marble floor. Things like these are interesting to work with because you don't see this very often, and so when this happens you kind of have to do some troubleshooting and figure out, okay, if I put them here, then I can shoot, I can expose for them and I won't mess up the shot. There's a light reflector also reflecting onto their faces, and so that's why you can see them but also see some of the background in the wall. And so this is indoor where to shoot. This is with a Japanese window screen on the right, and so it diffuses the light coming through. It makes it really soft, and it looks it's a pretty nice light source. And on the left hand side is the hotel room lights, also lighting that side of her body. Because they were tungsten, they were really warm colored, and so I had to fix that in post. The window light was blue, and the hotel light was yellow, and so that's something you have to watch out for when you're shooting with mixed light sources. So this was at a hotel in AX, and the reason I'm having them facing the chandelier is actually because that's the only light source in the room, and if they weren't facing it, I wouldn't be able to see them. To make up for that, I kind of had them reaching for each other as like I'm not purposely making them face this because it's the only light resource. Like, this is a compositional element, but so it's really problem solving and working with what you have to make a good shot.
So this one is an example of using like the big windows. As you guys recognize, this is shot here, Fanime. So I just had her like right in the center of the hallway, and I just let all the nice big windows do its thing and create nice big soft light. So here's the drawing for it. This one is shot at ALA. There's like a little basement area, and there's a lot of like rows and rows of like fluorescent light. And so what's nice about fluorescent lighting is that it actually is kind of a big light source if you think about it. Like they're not like buckets like these where they're tiny, but these are like the nice long lights. So basically by putting her right there directly into it to get her mostly lit, and then putting Castor right there like more in the dark to kind of get like a moody feel, I just basically let like some of the light bounce off of the floor to kind of light some of his face right there.
By the way, that's their storage room.
Oh.
You'll get kicked out of there.
Yeah, so if you shoot in there, you'll get kicked out. So now I can put-
Okay, so that's most of our panel there. What we want you to pay attention to more than anything is be conscious of your light source, whether it's the sun, a chandelier, a desk lamp, or a window, or whatever you're using. And position your subject accordingly based on the direction of the light. So if you want light falling across their face or directly on the face. Yep.
And so the main takeaway, you know, as well is that anything can be used as a light source. You just have to kind of like train your eye to look for it, and then just experiment. That's one of the biggest things, is just to experiment, try things out. You never know what you get, and if it doesn't work out, it doesn't work out, and you know, for this time it doesn't work out. But oftentimes what I find too is that sometimes things might not work out for this time, may work out for the next time. So don't totally write it off if it doesn't work this time. Just always keep trying.
Yeah, I agree. Just a lot of it is practice shooting in different lighting situations. I mean, if you think about it, the whole day you have different light sources and different situations you could be in, and so just practice and hope that something comes out. Make sure your cosplayers are happy also.
And one last quick thing about this whole sweet spot that we keep talking about. So pretend that this is like the sun right here, right? So like, you know, if you put somebody directly into sunlight, they're very lit. But notice as I kind of start moving away, how soft his like skin starts looking. At some point, when I move too far away, he's gonna get dark. So there's usually like with the sun, there's usually about a foot or something where you're getting some light on him, but it's not like direct light, where it starts creating like dramatic shadows. So this is usually what we're doing, is we're letting the sun come down, but we're shooting him right just a little bit over. So if you try that technique, you'll find that instantly you've got kind of a softbox in essence. So that pretty much concludes our discussion. And if anybody has any questions or anything, we do actually have some stuff to give away if anybody asks us some questions. So we open it up, there's a mic right there if anybody wants to, if there's something that we explained that wasn't too clear or we moved too fast on, feel free to ask, and we can, you know, go back and show the picture again and talk a little bit more if anybody's interested about it. And we're also available individually if you guys want to talk one-on-one with any of us. First question.
What the heck? What's your experience with LED light sources?
So I recommend buying cheap ones. Like this one, I just bought it cheap from a store called ePhoto Incorporated. It's basically a knockoff of the light panels. I did a lot of research about it, and we all know like light panels, there's a brand name called Light Panels, and they cost like $250 and up to $500. So this is like 50 bucks. Takes regular batteries. I put nickel metal hydride and loop batteries in it. What's nice about it is that you shouldn't really spend too much money on them. They talk about color balance, they talk about all that, but at the end of the day, there might be some color issues with a cheaper one, but the more expensive ones, they all break. So if you spend $250, it may break on you in a month. I mean, most of it is all made out of plastic. So just go cheap on it, and it works great. I always carry one around just to use, because you never know what you might use it for. You can always bounce light off of like reflective things, so you don't always have to use it like, you know, directly on people, but sometimes it offers just that little bit of light that you need.
Would there be a big difference in the diffuser color?
So, try not to blind everybody, but here's how it looks with a diffuser and without. So basically it does. In technical terms, this diffuser costs you basically what they call a stop of light. So when you take it off, you get like more light. So oftentimes that might be, that I find is too much, but in the sun, you know, that's probably what you want to use. Because you can kind of use it in the sun as well, pull it off and just full light to kind of fill in. You're not using it as your main light, but more to just fill in a little bit of the shadows. You want a sticker? I have t-shirts and I have a hat. Want that? Thanks so much.
Thanks.
Anybody else have any questions?
Raw or JPEG, and why?
Raw, always raw, because you can adjust your white balance afterwards, especially when you're shooting with odd light sources like shade or lamps or fluorescent lighting. You're always going to want to be able to have that latitude to adjust it afterwards.
Yeah, I agree. I always shoot in RAW. The only time I think I might shoot in JPEG is if I'm running out of room on my cards and I desperately have to shoot to conserve space in JPEG.
When I shoot motorsports, I don't care so much about the lighting, I guess, and it gives me more shots and faster shots. So that's one case where I would use JPEG.
I go back and forth. I'll shoot raw if the situation's like crazy, like they talked about, like different color light source, the white balance is going to be crazy. But if it's something that I just need to do coverage real quick and I'm just going to post it, or I can convert it all to black and white, I'll actually just shoot JPEG. Keep it simple. I'll try to correct my white balance in the camera. There's multiple ways you can use the presets. You can dial in kelvins and all those. It's a little bit more advanced, but in that case where the lighting is more predictable, like something in here, if I was going to shoot in here, I would probably just go shoot it JPEG. I'll just try to get the lighting as close and shoot it JPEG so it's done.
And your Instagram photos are in JPEG. So.
Yeah. So, did you want a shirt, a sticker? Question?
Yeah, question. First off, have any of you guys shot in film before?
No. I've only shot digital.
Okay, my question would have been, do you notice any difference in using film versus digital and how you deal with ambient light?
Right. Well, I shot it in film very briefly. I took a class and, excuse me, the difference, I think, is that in digital, you deal with the noise differently. You have like your programs that can take the noise out of low light photos. Whereas in film, you don't really have that. You can scan it and run it through a program, but it's pretty different when you're dealing with the noise aspect. I'm not too sure about when it comes to lighting, how that would affect it so much, but that's the biggest difference I noticed.
So I've never shot in film, but some photographers that I follow, some of my favorite photographers, do actually continue to still shoot in film. And one of the main reasons that they say for why they choose to continue to shoot in film is the way it handles light. Like, because oftentimes you see like some of us where we're shooting with the sun as a backlight and it's really white in the background. Mm-hmm. Film actually retains a lot of that detail in the background. So whereas like with digital, you have to be very good about your exposures, or else it's what they call blown out, where it's like white. Like sometimes if you take a photo where the person's in the sun, you see this area of their face or head, it's just white. You can't make out any details. With film, you can actually get some of that back, versus where digital, it's much harder if you're really off or if it's just way too bright in that spot. So that's one of the big advantages of shooting film, other than the resolution, and it's kind of cool too.
Yeah, that's why I have to shoot both, you know.
Sure. Yeah. Do you want a sticker or shirt?
Do you guys still have a hat?
Actually, no. We only have one. Sorry.
Okay.
And if you want a shirt, you can come see me afterwards. Any other questions?
I'm sorry, what was the question?
Use custom
Rarely. Sometimes hotels have really weird lighting, and so when that happens, I would try to do custom white balance. But if I can get away with one of the presets indoors, then I would do that normally.
I used to carry around this like little thing that I would shoot, and I would always do custom white balance, but that was mainly when I use Flash. because in order to use custom white balance effectively, the light source has to remain constant. Like it has to be the same power, it has to be the same distance and all that in order to get that nice like actual color. What you find sometimes is like with flash or like when you're shooting like very fast, that changes so much that it's hard to set custom white balance. So what I do now instead is I use my presets, like you know, the sun, the cloud. I try to I look at the LCD, I shoot it, I try to get it as close to it as possible. So in one regards, it's kind of custom white balance, but it's not in the truest regard of what I'm guessing that you're probably asking.
I think I think one of the main reasons why I don't custom white balance is at cons you're kind of in a hurry to get from photo shoot to photo shoot, and so if you have to custom white balance for every shoot, then that kind of takes up a good amount of time. Yeah.
So see care for a sticker or see me for a shirt.
Yeah, it also use white and gray cards as well. Can you explain more about that? I just heard about it, but don't know much.
Sure. So there's this thing they call a gray card. Basically, it's 18% gray that you can buy, and it's, you know, because the cameras are all set to meter for 18%. So you shoot it, you can set like your exposure, your white balance, and everything off of it, and that's great. Like if your lighting situation is always consistent, that's great. And mainly people use it in the studio so that they don't have to worry about doing it afterwards in Photoshop and everything. But it is very time consuming, unfortunately, because you have to do it every time you have a new subject. And when you're shooting outside and you're shooting ambient, lighting changes very fast. Like you may not notice it, but like clouds might fly right over by. There might be just like, you know, like the subject moves a little bit off, any of that case. So, you know, I don't really do gray cards anymore. I just basically I really chimp, you know, for the most part. I look at my screen, you know, and just get it that way as close as I can based on what the screen is telling me. And part of it is knowing how your screen looks like too, like based on seeing the final result on a computer, because it will always look different. So you have to kind of remember that, okay, it's slightly going to be like lighter on my screen versus the computer and this and that, just keeping all those in mind.
Metering modes, even if you're doing manual, do you have preferences in the various metering modes in cameras?
Basically, I just look at if it's direct sunlight, I try to do the bracketing, and so it would do one stop over and under when I'm shooting automatically, and that helps with exposure.
I always use center weighted. The main reason being is shooting weddings, for whatever reason, the groom always wears black and the bride always wears white. So if you're familiar with photography, you know all that means is that the camera tells you all gray. So the white isn't really white, it's trying to make it gray. The black isn't really black, it tries to make it gray. So shooting on center, instead of because there's like 3 modes, there's like evaluative where it looks at the whole thing, center looks at like the center portion, and then there's spot that looks at a very specific spot. I use center because most of the time I'm aiming at the face, and I get my meter reading off of that. And shooting a manual, I trust my camera's metering to tell me is it over, under, and then I usually go like about a third over because it helps smooth the skin out a little bit. So that's my technique with it.
Also, one thing I do frequently is I look at the histogram on the screen and see if your highlights are blown, because I try to preserve the highlights as much as possible, because you can sometimes pull stuff from shadows, but you can't really pull stuff from highlights in post. So yeah.
So the question was how often we shoot with tripods, correct?
Oh, I never use tripods. It's kind of due to the nature of cosplay shooting, where you're always moving around and trying to figure out different compositions, and so because of that, it's kind of limiting to have a tripod. At least that's what I feel.
Yeah, the same way. I have one, but I hardly ever use it.
So I primarily use mine for group shots when I'm actually in it as well. So when I don't have somebody to actually take the shot, I'll set it on a tripod and put a remote on it, and that way I'll be in the shot, and then, you know, so that's mainly when I use a tripod as well, and mainly for the same reasons, because most of the time you can get away if you just like increase your ISO, you know, at the cost of more noise, but having an image that isn't blurry, I think is worth it.
If your camera has an auto DRO mode, would that help balance out the shadows?
Auto DR mode as in dynamic range, kind of like HDR or that kind of stuff.
kind of what Rachel was talking about.
Yeah. I mean, it can and it can't. I mean, it comes down to, I think, how comfortable you are with your camera. Like if you know that your camera is very good about figuring all this out, then sure. I mean, because my camera has it. Like kind of you know what it is it basically prevents you from really like what they call clipping the highlights. So the camera like kind of like does a little bit of adjustments for you. I have it set to like usually low or normal, and most of the time, because I like to try to do most of the thinking, let the camera do kind of the heavy lifting, but then kind of like tweak my settings based on what the camera is telling me. Any other questions in the back? What size lenses do we primarily use?
I use the 50mm basically because of the aperture setting.
I like my 135mm. Just when you're shooting at cons, you know, sometimes there's a lot of people in the background and you want to just isolate your subjects, and the 135 is really good at that.
Yeah, 95% of the time I shoot with a 50mm, mainly because I'm more of a people person. So it lets me get close to my subjects. I can talk to them, but still stay far away enough that they don't feel like their personal space is like being violated or anything. So 50mm is my preferred lens.
Yeah, what software do you guys use for post-processing? And what kind of resources would you recommend for purchasing software, like say Lite?
Well, sorry, I didn't get the last part, but...
what kind of resources would you recommend for learning you to use such as?
Okay. Okay, well, I use Lightroom 4 to sort my photos as like a catalog and do global edits in Lightroom, such as like the white balance. You can copy paste it to all your photos, and it saves a lot of time. And in post, I use Photoshop to touch up things like stray strings that cosplayers have, or like trash bags on the ground sort of thing. Usually YouTube is a good source. They have like videos, tutorial videos, and they're free. So if you find a person who knows what they're talking about, usually they have a couple videos up and you can watch them and learn from what they're doing.
Yeah, I also use Lightroom 4, mainly for the digital asset management portion of it, because it's great for cataloging all your photos. You know, I use the tagging feature, I use the rating feature, I use all the features of Lightroom 4 that I can, because it's very, very useful. So when you have a catalog of like 50,000 photos, it makes it very easy to go through them.
I primarily use Lightroom too. I'm not very much of a Photoshop person, so and we're actually about out of time. I'm not very much of a Photoshop person, so Lightroom is my thing. And some resources I would recommend is like Scott Kelby, actually, KelbyInteractive.com. Kelby books are, I think, generally pretty well, easy to follow kind of deal. So those would be a resource I would recommend. I think Lydia.com or something, Linda.com is also a good place, in YouTube, as everybody else has mentioned. So I guess we'll have to be out. So anybody who asks questions and wants a t-shirt or stickers, t-shirts, come see me. Stickers, Kara will hand out at the very end. Thank you so much, everybody, for coming to our panel. Hopefully you guys have picked up a few tips and anything. And as always, we're available afterwards. Just feel free to approach us.